every day, every day, every day. Every night, every night, every night. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. Every night, every night, every night, every night, every night. Overtime, I'm conscientious by design to reach the heights of academe, to be the captain of the team, to CEO 1,000 who will do the things I say to do, and I will make a lot of bread, and you will find me good in bed. I will push, I will pull, I will push, I will pull a couple strings and find myself atop the corporation. Maximum, I send and get the facts to them. A pocket place, a new Corvette, a landing gear, a private jet, a stock incentive, busting out the vocal silver. Say I'm out your lady friend, we'll put it through. And listen here, I'm through with you, through with you, through with you, through with you, through with you. Yes, I think I got the point, and bam, there goes my motivation. What to do, what to do, what to do, what to do. All that I could think of was I'm tendering my resignation. But all I do now is stick around. All I do now. Stick around, stick around. All I do now is stick around when the sun goes up.
Coming to you from Silver Lake, Los Angeles, California, LARB HQ, I'm Colin Marshall. This is the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. Sitting down here today with Tosh Berman, formerly the book buyer at Book Soup on the Sunset Strip, founder of TamTam Books, specializing in international 20th century literature, and author of a new book, Sparks-Tastic, 21 Nights with Sparks in London. You probably know the name Sparks. You probably know they're a band, especially if you're from Los Angeles, where the Sparks brothers, the male brothers, these male brothers that make up Sparks are from, or if you're from London, I suppose, or if you're from France and we're listening to pop music during a very specific couple of years, you probably know about Sparks, but you may not know about Sparks. Tosh knows about Sparks. Let me ask you this. I discovered Sparks in the 21st century long after you did, and I had the reaction that several other Sparks fans now had when they discovered Sparks, which is, first, is this band real? Are we sure they're real? Are we sure this isn't just a couple of middle-aged guys who made up a fake history and made up 21 albums, all of which they placed carefully in a historical era using the various subgenres of pop music? Is this not one big conceptual art project that was recently crafted? Because I would have heard about these guys otherwise. You're familiar with that reaction, right?
Well, you found out the truth and now you must die.
Oh, geez. This is going to be the last interview.
They work conceptually, actually. There's so many stories about Sparks, like where they came from. It seems like everybody feels they came from another part of the world where they did not come from. Many people think they're British because they really broke big in the UK in the early 70s or mid-70s. Some people think they're from France or from Belgium. They're actually from Pacific Palisades. As far as I know, and I do know them, they are brothers, Ron Mel and Russell Mel. And they are Sparks. And they work with various musicians for the past, probably like 40 years now. But they still make records. They've been on, I think, every major label in the world at least twice. And they're always known or popular in some part of the world. It seems like right now, it seems they're sort of now actually doing but they're actually touring the U.S. And they're going to tour Europe, and they're doing a show in Japan in July. So they play everywhere, and they played in Russia, East Europe.
You say now they're actually touring the U.S., and you've talked about how people speculate they must be from place X, Y, and Z around the world, but not America. What is so non-American about Sparks? I would have said un-American, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for.
That's such a, they sound like they're writing about American culture, but from a European viewpoint, like a European perspective.
They are American outsiders in America?
Worse, they're from Pacific Palisades. they're from the west side of Los Angeles. I think they were born in Venice, California, and eventually moved to Pacific Palisades as teenagers or late, childhood. They are outsiders. They're outsiders, I think, like a lot of great songwriters or outsiders. I always think of Sparks or Ron Mell's work and Russell's as sort of in the same line as Cole Porter, Ira Gershwin, Irving Berlin. Sort of either like a very waspish take on the world, a very sophisticated take on the world, or like a sort of like the old like sort of Jewish songwriters, so Broadway songwriters of the 30s and 20s and 40s, and who are sort of outsiders just because they're songwriters, they have their sort of their own culture in a way, and Ronald Russell in a way belongs to that culture more than say a rock and roll songwriter.
When you first discovered Sparks, what did they represent the alternative to or an escape from for you?
Escape from rock and roll imagery and rock and roll isms.
Which were who? Who was making those in that era?
In my youth, I was pretty much the music that I was really like as a teenager was really attracted to glam rock. Specifically David Bowie and all the side products of David Bowie, the Lou Reeds, the Velvets, David Bowie was sort of the magnet, and then all these other people came from that flower bud, that's David Bowie. So, but at the same time, it was the start of the whole singer-songwriter movement, like a Little Canyon, like Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, James Taylor. So on one side you have the James Taylor world, and then you have the glam rock world. And the glam world I was much more attracted to because of the visuals and the sort of superficiality of those bands. I like superficiality. I like surface. And Sparks seems almost militant surfacey to me. When I first saw a picture of them, is when around the time of Come On to My House or their single This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us broke in the UK, which I didn't hear at the time. Because, it was before the internet, before, even good radio that played imports or, So I just remember looking at the Melody Maker, which is a British music weekly.
Buying one of the 3 copies every week at the grocery store, right?
In Topanga Canyon, which I was raised, there's 3 copies of Melody Maker sold there. And I bought one. And I don't know what the other 2 issues, what happened to the other 2 issues. But I saw this photograph of Ron Mell and Russell Mell together. And the first impression is Russell Mell has a sort of almost like a teen idol look. There's nothing gritty about him at all. This total teen idol,
non-threatening kid,
non-threatening, very cute, but like a David Cassidy at the time, but with an edge of some sort. And then somebody introduced in the picture as his brother, Ron Mell, who dressed in 1930s clothing, and for strange enough, had either, it depends your point of view, a Charlie Chaplin mustache or a Hitler mustache. Right. And the fact that he has hair slicked back and he seemed the totally opposite of his brother. Just the dynamics of those 2 together in one photograph really, it just turned me on. And so, months, weeks later, Come On to My House, I bought an import copy of Come On to My House at the local warehouse record store, a record store chain at that time, very boring chain. Yeah. I saw Come On to My House, and when I picked up the album, there was no lettering on the front cover at all at the time. It's just a picture of these 2, I presume, Japanese women wearing kimonos, making sort of funny facial expressions. Right. And I thought, Come On to My House, which I think is a pun of an old song called Come to My House by, like not Dinah Shore, but somebody with that classic.
What was that?
Oh shoot, jeez, a great like a jazz pop singer of the 50s.
Right. That's the sensibility that we're calling on with that anyway.
Yeah, like a pun. And then I turned the cover around and it has the name Sparks, Come On to My House, the title, little pictures of their band, which were all English at the time, and then a bigger photograph, which kind of interesting, separate themselves from the rest of the band, of Ronald Russell. And again, it was that photograph of but a little bit more sinister, with more shadows of Russell sort of looking like a perverse version of David Cassidy or Leif Garrett or one of those, people. And then Ron Mell, who looked in the photograph, looked borderline really evil. Not like fake evil or Alice Cooper type of evil, but there's something very insidious. Right.
And again, the non-threatening and the threatening.
Exactly. And then, look at the titles. This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us, Falling in Love with Myself Again, In My Family. And those song titles, this also, in either a poetic or literary sense, this really hit me. I love the song titles.
You sensed the off-kilteriness you would find within.
And also they were on Island Records, which at that time, they had people like Roxy Music. At the point where, and Eno. So this is the point of the time where they had artists on that label who were doing really interesting, weird work. So I figure like if they're on Island Records, they have to be kind of weird as well, sounding.
Right. You mentioned an interest in surfaces that you have, and the surfaces of Sparks, of course, have always been interesting throughout their career, whether it's on the 21 album covers or elsewhere, or on stage. And I wonder, can we call Sparks a band that understands the importance of being not just a band, but generally speaking and broadly speaking, an aesthetic entity? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that's what appealed to me about them. I felt, as a fan, like as a pop music fan, this is a band I was very comfortable to follow, to say I'm a fan of this band. And
for purely aesthetic reasons.
Just visual enough. The visually was enough. Also, I like the provocativeness of Ron Mail's look. I love the Chaplin Hitler thing. Because the music, when you listen to, well, when I first heard the album, the first song was This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. I was totally blown away by it. Because Russell's voice is like really high at the time, or still is. But the lyrics, I couldn't understand the lyrics at all. It was just going like 100 miles per hour. And the music was going 110 miles per hour. And it was really in your face. I mean, I couldn't imagine anybody to this day really ignoring that record. Right. You can hate it or you can turn it off. But it's almost equivalent of like punk rock or like Iggy's Raw Power, something that gets in your face, you know.
It's definitely not a background.
Totally not background music. And I was just struck by the beautiful melodies, even though they were fast-paced, which I presume, and also the wording, which I presume was better than average, because I couldn't really hear all the lyrics at the time. And there's no ballads on that album, but there's such beautiful melodies in the album, and that's the way they perform it and the way they sort of frame it. I just became an instant fan right away. I mean, right there and then, I just knew like this is people doing really interesting work, and I'm happy to be in their presence or in their world.
In the 70s, you saw bands emerge that insisted it's all about the music.
Yes.
But Sparks, it's about the music, but also equally everything else, right?
Yes, I hate bands that say they're in for the music. To this day, it drives me up the wall.
Because you think they're lying, or because you think it isn't all about the music?
I don't think it's ever about the music. Even with jazz music, which I love, I think I have really a hardcore mod aesthetic. Not to mean that I am a mod or I dress like a mod, but I sort of appreciate the whole stature of that world of a mod aesthetic, where it's a very strict world. And, and for them, like listening to black music was totally visual because they're thinking of Motown, they're thinking of the choreography, they're thinking of the whole production of Motown records. So the whole, even jazz, like Miles Davis has such an incredible visual presentation. Or Thelonious Monk, these great, great, great composers. They never disappoint you by the album cover. You want to buy a good jazz album, just go to Blue Note or Riverside record label, choose a great cover, and it's going to be a great album.
You write about every Sparks album in Sparks-Tastic because it's about you attending shows of every album. They play every album, 21 nights with Sparks in London. No coincidence they have 21 albums. At that time, had 21 albums. Can you judge a Sparks album by its cover?
Good question. It's always going to be quirky. That's one thing. So it's kind of difficult. They don't do... It's another thing about them. They're very not always obvious. It's not like Queen, or Queen is like bingo. You get it. Sparks is you have to really sort of live with it to get it. And they do play with their iconic stance. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. Even if you never heard of Sparks or don't really know Sparks, you do know those album covers because other bands throughout the world have done their own parodies of those album covers or their tribute to those album covers. I saw one for Propaganda not long ago, a Japanese artist, And then there was these two, I can't remember who it was, these two women who did the Big Beat cover, the Richard Avedon portrait of Sparks. So visually, obviously, they made a huge presentation on indie rock or bands in the last 10 years. But no, it's not that easy. There's a lot of humor and pretty much everything they have put out graphically wise. Especially in the 80s, like Inks in My Pants, where like Ron is dressed up as the bride, Russell is the bridegroom. Then Pulling Rabbits Out of the Hat, where Ron is holding Russell as a dummy. You know,
Right, yes.
So
Not your favorite album, but a striking cover.
Great cover. Not my favorite album, but again, the humor is always there.
What does it say about Sparks that they would do such a thing of putting on 21 straight shows of 21 albums? And as far as I know, that's the only plan they ever had to do something like this. It's not like they're doing a series of all their albums in different countries. This was it. Yes. It was so much work for one big burst. What does that tell you about this band?
That they're totally conceptual or they're totally insane or both. Now it's very common for a band to do their popular album from beginning to end. You know, that's what they do. It's like, side 2 starts here. Right. Almost every band's been around longer than 10 years is going on tour, doing their one big album. The fact that Sparks is not doing Come On to My House, which is probably everybody sort of considers the classic Sparks album, makes sense. But to do every album of theirs, including the ones that I don't like and ones that a lot of people don't like, from beginning to end. And you have to actually pay to go to these shows. Right. And they're doing it very close to the versions, or much as possible as the recorded versions. So, one, it's remarkable they did it. Two, because they have to sort of relearn the songs or rearrange the beginning. Because when you play a record on a needle, it just starts up. But, you know, they had to figure out how to start the song and then how to stop the song. You know, you can't fade it. Like you turn the longest lower and lower. So they had to figure that out. And they had to relearn like a lot of, almost all their songs they had to relearn, because they don't tour a lot. So this is like sort of, and the fact they did it in one location, in London, and I think in their way they were trying to promote their new album at the time. And they thought, hey, why don't we just do a gimmick thing? We'll just do every album to that point. Which is kind of great about them, because they sort of, whatever they do, they always seem to do things the hard way. They never take the easy route.
I want to talk about how you came to the point where you attended these shows in London, but we know you did. So you're sitting there, you're watching these shows, and you're describing the shows in the book as you're describing the work that went into these shows, the rehearsals all day except Sunday with barely a break all the time. And it sounds like Sparks keeps this schedule, or a similar schedule, just normally when they're making their music, when they're rehearsing for any show. They're a factory in some sense, or they're as dedicated as machines are in a factory. And I had the same thought while I was watching Apocalypse Now, screening at the Egyptian a little while ago, which is that now I understand why you would want to give yourself over to some all-consuming project or effort or job or just thing. Religious people talk about how they want to serve something higher than themselves. And I never quite understood that, but thinking about Coppola making Apocalypse Now over in the Philippines and enduring everything he endured, and Sparks making any given album, I suppose, or putting on a 21-night show of all their albums, you see what that means, don't you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. They're very self-contained. It's just them and whoever they hire or who they work with. They record everything in their own studio. They have their own label now. And they pretty much, probably similar to, I think, what I always heard about Kraftwerk, how they work. They go, they meet at 9 o'clock and they work till 6 o'clock every day. And then I think they take Sundays off. And I'm presuming that it's sit there and look at each other till something comes up, or they actually have they have various projects on hand that they're working on. Right. But it is very much of a, not only of a lifestyle, but there is a job, I sense a job sensibility where they're almost clocking in and clocking out and clocking out for lunch type of, a system in their lives.
And we think of Sparks as a prolific band because they've recorded so much and they do shows like this. But you think of that schedule. You think of, they've been doing this since the late 60s, early 70s. They must have thrown out so much over the years. You think of the material that they decided, hasn't worked, or that they've cast aside, or that they've changed into something unrecognizable. I think of the 5 years they spent, you mentioned, doing the soundtrack for Mai the Psychic Girl, which never appeared, and then the work they did with Jacques Tati, who died while they were working on the score for a film which I'm sure our mutual friend Michael Silverblatt would have exploded with delight at actually having existed. So maybe it's better that it didn't get pulled off. It saved a life. He would have found too much pleasure in it. Yes. But do you think about that just the discard stack of Sparks must be the biggest thing in the world?
I don't think there is. I think their outlet is very controlled and very precise. I mean, there's a lot of like Sparks bootlegs of all sorts. A friend of mine who is more internet savvy than I am made me like this Among Us like Sparks everything. Like when they were called Half Nelson, their first demo stuff. But considering they've been around for 40 years, very little outtakes. I think Ron and Russell they're very focused. That's one thing I noticed about them. They're very, very focused on what they want to do. They have like a vision and they'll do it. Although sometimes I think this is kind of insane, like doing 21 shows in 21 so nights. But their vision is so strong. And I don't think they they don't sit around and jam, I imagine there's like a lot of Rolling Stones stuff out there where there's jamming. Right. It's, Ron Mel is and again, I really don't know what their work process, and in a way I didn't want to know. And this is one thing about the book. It's not a documentary of the band or the making of these shows. It's more of me being a fan, being the audience, and taking this all in, as well as talking about London and a little bit of Paris. And in my mind, I'm talking about Sparks culture, which sort of I inherited, or as a fan, I'm sort of riffing off on. But over the years, I know them quite well, and never have they ever played me anything that's half baked or half finished or stuff. I do know there is a sound. There is a Mai the Psychic Girl songs out there, which I don't think I've heard, but that is few and beyond that. There's not that much material of not released.
How did you come to the point then where it became inevitable that you fly to London and attend all these shows? You opened the book talking a bit about the struggle to decide, but at what point did it seem like you not just wanted to, but needed to go there?
It was very strange. Well, I heard about the shows. I heard it through them. And at the time I was friendly, but not like super close friends. And I thought, what a great idea, and totally insane idea. But then I thought, wouldn't it be great just to go to one show or two shows? I thought 2, wow, that'd be incredible. First, not even come over to my house. It's the first 2 albums. And then it just dawned on me like, wait, if I'm going to just go those 2 and go to London, I have to go to all the shows. It was almost like an overnight. Right. Like I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I have to do this. And I said, I have to write a book about it. And at that time it was clear I was not going to write a biography of the band or, again, a documentary on how they're going to do this. I'm actually more interested in the mystery of Sparks, the mythology of them, than actually talking about what is the real Ron and Russell or how they do things. That I was not really that interested in. I actually prefer believing the myth. And the myth, they haven't told me the myth. I just heard the myth through other resources. Right. Like they were models for Sears, Well, or their mothers was the president of their fan club, whose name is Mary Martin. And that was another thing that struck me. It was like Mary Martin. Because Mary Martin, as a child, I used to love watching Peter Pan. You can't watch. I don't think. Maybe it's on YouTube. But as a child of the late 50s, early 60s, every year they showed or rebroadcast this live production of Peter Pan with Mary Martin, the lead, playing Peter Pan. Because women always played Peter Pan. Right. And so as a child, I was at that age where I was totally enthralled with seeing the show. I look forward to it. So I kept thinking, then, wait, is Mary Martin Ronald Russell's mom? Or did something happen to Mary Martin where she had to end up being the president of the Sparks fan club? Or, it was like all these, like, what? Huh? Right. How's this work out? But so there's all these sort of myths about them, were they at the TMI show, the Tammy show, which I was there as a child. And I kind of appreciate them never ever talking about it or either commenting on it.
not many people get to know the actual bands that they have followed closely for decades. And as you mentioned, you know the Mail Brothers now. And you've mentioned you're also fascinated by the myth. So how do you keep in your head both the myth that you get from the external sources and the knowledge of the actual brothers?
That's a good question. You know, I was very fortunate in my life to actually meet a lot of the people I admire or practical idols. You know, my dad became friendly with Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. And I was a huge, Rolling Stones fan of that time. And the fact that he came to our house and he looked exactly like Brian Jones from Aftermath album cover, wearing the same clothes. It was a weird, you usually expect a voice difference or some type of difference. But the fact, here's this guy who appeared in front of me who looked incredible. I mean, just incredibly handsome and just the ultimate pop star. There's nothing funky about him at all. And I was never let down by his behavior or his the way he looked. And he was a lovely person, by the way. There's been a lot of stories of him not being lovely, but as a child, I really liked him. And so a lot of people I've met over the years, I sort of separate. I'm not a stalker type of person, or I can admire somebody greatly if I like a writer, but I do not base my relationship on me liking their work or I'm interested in what they're doing, but I separate that sort of fanboy or fan attitude towards the real person, or I accept them as what they are.
Right. It's two different things in your head: Sparks and the Mail Brothers. Yeah. They're connected, of course. One creates the other, or the Mail Brothers do a kind of work that is then mythologized into Sparks by both them and by their audience, but they're separate in some important sense, right?
In a certain sense, yes, but to be quite honest, the Sparks you're getting on record on those album covers, that's truly Sparks.
And they show up looking like they would on the album covers. Yes.
And there's no real big... They live the life of Sparks, and they are truly Sparks. So it's not like a day job. I mean, it's a day job they're doing, but they take their work home with them, and their private moments is very much Ron Mel, Russell Mel, Sparks. There's no private life or another identity of sorts.
Right. What does it mean to live the life of Sparks, other than that to be making the music of Sparks? What does the life of Sparks mean to you?
It means that they keep up the aesthetic of what I feel is the aesthetic of Sparks. They have, obviously, I think they have really good taste. And the fact that I actually, first time I ever talked to Ron Mel, person, was at a screening for a Jacques Demy movie.
Oh, really?
So this is
which one?
Donkey Skin.
Oh yes, Donkey Skin. I'm not surprised to see one of the Sparks do a turn up at Donkey Skin. I don't know why, but I'm not surprised.
Exactly right. That's exactly what I meant. I didn't meet him at a Die Hard screening, or it was a Jacques Demy screening where I actually started talking to him, and so we have a common interest. Jacques Demy, Michel Legrand, that whole French world.
And notably, you saw just one Mail Brother.
At that time.
Yes, which must have been a little bit odd on some level. I've never seen that guy I've never seen just the one brother.
No. I never have separate times with them. I always see them as a unit or together.
That was the one time.
It was only one time, yeah.
It's like seeing half a clock, or I guess the clock, half the numbers are on there. Yeah, do you know what I mean? There's an oddity layered onto that when you're interacting with one half of a dyad. You've come to know that way, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, you immediately, I think if you see Ron, you're thinking, "Where's Russell?" or vice versa. He must be somewhere in that room. But as far as I know, I think socially, I mean, they're the famous definition of brothers, and especially in bands that hate each other.
Yes.
I mean, there's like the Oasis guy, the Gallaghers, Ray Davies and Dave Davies, the Kinks, and even like the Burnett brothers, Johnny Burnett and Dorsey Burnett, hate each, and the Everly brothers are famous for not liking each other. And then there are certain brothers that work as one. And in my book, I sort of make this comparison a lot with the Cray twins. The Crays were a British gangsters from the 60s who ruled London, or East London specifically. had their hands in everything in the entertainment world as well. And they were twins, and they sort of like worked as one. Mm-hmm. And there's certain people like the Starn twins who are artists, and Gilbert and George. And, these are like male couples or brothers who just work as like sort of like one. You really don't get like separate. They have separate identities, but the way they work and the way they present their work is as one.
There do seem to be more of those in England. I mean, you mentioned the whole spectrum from Criminals all the way down to Oasis. But what else in London culture does Sparks resonate with that has made them more successful there than in some other countries, and which made it a place they could do 21 concerts in a row?
For many levels. One level, I think the British world or entertainment world likes eccentricities a lot. Like David Bowie would never make it as Ziggy Stardust in America unless, he was English and he made it in England. So they like the theatricality of these artists, as well as the, I think they like the surface, like my reasons for liking a band. They're in tune to that already. And the other thing is, Sparks to me are very much what I understand at British music hall entertainment. And to this day, I think of them as sort of British music entertainers. I think of them being in a small, like, vaudeville theater doing a show for the punters, for the audience. Yes. And it's like a recital in a way. It's not like in a way it's a rock and roll show, but I think as a rock and roll show, I think more of it as a music hall performance. And that's why I wrote about, besides the mustache of Charlie Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin was also, besides a film artist, he was a music hall artist as well. And I just think there's a connection between people like Charlie Chaplin, or that spirit of entertainment, and a little bit of like sort of the entertainer, the John Osborne, the British playwright.
Oh yeah, John Osborne.
The entertainer, where it's about English music. I didn't write about it in the first draft I wrote about that book, not the final draft. But I sort of made comparisons in the original draft of like that type of music entertainer who's just totally focused, and that's all he does is entertain at these sort of small theaters throughout England, and that's his life. And in many ways, I find Sparks sort of in the same boat. By design more than because they have to. It's. I think there's something about them, like, let's do a show. There's like they used to open up their shows like, let's do a Sparks show. There's a little theme song, a Sparks show. Right. So that has like a fake theatrical aspect of it already. And then they do their show, and then there's a strong Russell presence, what he does, and there's a strong Ron Mail presence on the stage. So it's very much like a Laurel and Hardy or Albert Costello, not with the broad slapstick humor, though there is like slapstick qualities in the show. There is a sort of a tradition of like British showbiz or French chanteuse singing or European theater, which again makes it odd because they're Americans.
Right. Yes. I'm glad you mentioned France, because Sparks-Tastic offers, of course, your personal history with Sparks, but also obviously a London travel log, also a bit of a Paris travel log because you go to Paris first. Yes. And you have experiences there. You talk about Paris, a place with which you have a history, like you have a history with Sparks. But the song that Sparks did very well with in France, When I'm With You, was off of an album that didn't really resonate with you, Terminal Jive, right? So you're interested in French culture and Paris culture and in mid-century Paris pop culture, shall we say. Why is it? What is it that I presume your favorite band and one of your favorite periods of European cultural history, and France being a favorite cultural country for you, why do they like a different Sparks song than you like, if that makes any sense?
They have that all around the world, basically. French population love that song.
Yeah, why do they like that song? I mean, I like the song too, I will say. I listened to it more than some Sparks songs, but I wouldn't have made it number one by myself, certainly.
Do you have a French background? Are you French? Or?
No, I don't have anything to do with France.
I can't give you a proper answer on that, because there are songs or albums they've done that's only popular in a specific country for some reason, and I'm not really sure why. I never liked that song because it was the early 80s, and the production of that album I do not like. It's a little too slick, a little too predictable. The Georgia Mortar #1 song, the previous album, it was like a one-step, like wow type of record, which I didn't like at first. I had to like sort of grow into it. But it was totally a new sound, new everything. And this I feel like was not advancing. It was just sort of going backwards in a way, that particular record.
What happened to Sparks in the 80s exactly? It seems like maybe, as you described them, they fell victim to the same trends that claimed #1 pop stars in an even worse way. But it does seem like if any act can resist that, it would have been Sparks. So what do you think happened?
Well, they did exist after that. Right? I think just due to their uniqueness. One thing that never fails is really their songs. I mean, sometimes I don't like their records, but they don't write bad songs. That's impossible.
And here you learn that when it's live and not layered with TR-808s or whatever was the production style of the mid-'80s. Yeah.
So I think, they had like Ants in My Pants, Womp That Sucker, very, very good albums, I think. Really good, strong work. But afterwards, I think they were trying to either follow a formula, and this is only my personal perspective, and maybe trying to appeal. Usually, they're either behind the times or they're way ahead of the times. And I got this point where I think they feel like they could be part of the times, which is actually sort of the '80s new wave, K-rock, Los Angeles station world. The Go-Go's and Fix and all these Haircut 100, all these sort of '80s bands, as well as Los Angeles bands, were really sort of popular at that time to be quirky. The only difference is they're really quirky compared to some of these bands that are trying to pretend to be quirky.
Yes.
And I just feel at the time they were sort of misunderstood, and sort of maybe either by the record labels, or it just did not grab me like it did, like the earlier material.
Is this something you've actually brought up with the Mail Brothers? Like, how come you had to be produced that way in that era? Is that a question you would ask them, or is it off the table as far as a question you would ask?
I would never ask them that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to play them this podcast. But no, I never asked them that because I think they had their own reasons. I'm not really that curious about why. Again, it's sort of like I'm so egotistical. I just want to know how I get it from the records and the performance and stuff. I mean, every band who's been around for that long is going to have its ups and downs. It's impossible not to. Or you disappear for a while, don't do anything for a while. I mean, there's people like Bowie. Bowie had, in my opinion, questionable records of the 80s. Yeah. Though
his low point seems to be regarded as the late 80s also, now that I think about it.
And it's probably, but money-wise, it's probably where he made his fortune.
It might well be, yeah.
Yeah, like Let's Dance, and which is not that bad record, but it's not as mysterious or powerful as like Low or Lodger or it's definitely a commercial record. Let's put it that way. It's a good commercial album. But if you're a long-term hardcore Bowie fan, you want a little bit more. And I'm not saying they have to give you more, but as a long-term fan, you're looking for that more. Another person I'm quite fond of is Scott Walker, who's been around for maybe 50 years now. And, as anybody who may or know or should know Scott Walker, he's going more out there and more crazier music. He's just going forward to like another planet. And therefore, as a fan, I'm never disappointed. And when you like somebody a whole career, like Scott Walker's a good example, and Sparks, you accept everything they do. Even if it's bad, you stick with it, or you don't understand it, you stick with it because you do like them, you do admire them, because they have a certain aesthetic they're working for, and they have there's low periods, high periods, and it could be me as a listener who's having a low, high period as well. So it's a give and take situation.
There's a sense in which you're approaching Sparks. You're not approaching this album by this album by this album by this album, though of course you can have many an argument about individual merits of albums, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, and I mean, throughout the book, I'm sort of talking, I admit there's some albums I do not like, and how surprising. The shows I love were the shows with the albums I do not like.
Yes.
Kimono House sounded great, fantastic. That's a classic album, classic performance, done deal. But the ones to me that were not a done deal, that showed me like, wow, this is really interesting. That they actually presented these songs, strange enough, very close to the recordings. It clicked in my head like, wow, that's actually a great song, or I have to re-listen to this. So seeing them doing it live in that context was ear opening for me.
When you're there live, seeing these shows, you start off noticing that the crowd around you, at first they're all people around Sparks's age, kind of a predictable crowd at first, and then it changes as you go through the shows. It gets maybe younger as you go along, or what were the currents of change you most noticed as the 21 nights progressed in the people around you?
Well, it's very conservative, actually, because the older shows had like older audience, not younger audience. And the first shows seemed to have like a lot of male dads bringing their kids. Not everybody had brought a kid. Right. But I got the feeling that you're dragging their kid, girlfriend, new wife, and the wife and the new kids. I don't get it. My daddy is a weirdo,
Oh, sure.
Poor dad. And they were really into the shows. Come On to My House had older and newer people because it's like a classic, iconic album. But strange enough, as the shows go on, the crowd got younger. Number one song in heaven, number one song in heaven show was fascinating because all of a sudden it became a gay disco.
Yes.
It was like overnight. One night it was all our rock dads and some students, and then all of a sudden it became wall to wall a gay disco. And same with the next album, and then when it got into the 80s stuff, which is not really that well known in London, known in Los Angeles, actually younger people start showing up. So I think more of the looky-loos are more curious. People are curious about them. Show up in more of the later shows.
And what was your approach to living a life in London during these shows? You talk a little bit about your routine, when you would write, how frequently you would shave or infrequently to save money on razors, and how you'd be there every night at 7. What shape did your life take while you were doing this Sparks attendance?
Well, funny, I'm a big fan of this movie called La Samurai, made by Melville, a French director who does a lot of French crime movies. And this movie stars Alain Delon, where it's the most minimal role ever. He just wears a trench coat, hat. He's a hired killer, does his job, and that's it. And in a way, I wanted to adopt it myself after that character. So I didn't want any frills. I didn't want extra books. I didn't want anything. I wore pretty much a uniform. I cut my hair really short because I didn't want to deal with hair stuff. I used really into hair stuff. And I didn't really have a lot of money. Money-wise, none of this made sense. I mean, from the tickets to, I had friends to stay with, two friends I could stay with.
Mitigated somewhat by the fact that you're writing a book about it all, though. It's work at that point, right? When did it become work?
It became work right away because I'm one of those people that I can't do things out of pure enjoyment. I can't take a walk and just take a walk to enjoy the weather. If I'm going to enjoy the weather, I'm going to write about it or somehow work it into something, like a TamTam Books project, or hopefully get an idea or inspiration. So whenever I do anything or go anywhere or travel, it's never rarely pure enjoyment. And once in a while, it's funny. My wife and I will go, and we're just talking once every 5 or 6 years, I will go to a matinee movie. Right. Where there's no work, there's nothing. And it's very pleasurable, but it's not our lifestyles whatsoever, or my. So doing this thing, I had to write a book. I had to, if I'm going to make the effort, I'm going to spend the money, and I'm going to do this decadent thing by going to all the shows. Right. I have to produce a work of some sort. And I told everybody I'm going to write a book. When I tell people I write a book, that means if I don't write the book, I'm going to look this terrible in everybody's eyes.
Right. You're going to have there's stakes. There's stakes at that point.
Yes. So I had to do it. And to do it, I had to get myself in a mentality where I cannot. Luckily, I've been to London numerous times before this London trip, and Paris. So it wasn't totally new city to me. So I didn't feel like I had to go visit museums or any of that type of things. I'd done that already. But again, I was very concerned about the expenses because to have at the time to go to a chain pizza place, to have an individual pizza and some olives and a glass of wine, it came to $30-something. And it's not good food. Right. It's a good lesson. Spend $50 on something really good. Right. Then you're not thinking about the money because you're really having a great night. But if you're buying this sort of almost to-go food for that amount of money, it's weird. So I had like a diet thing as well, where I just had like a banana for breakfast. I like to drink wine, but I had to cut the wine consumption down. And I just wake up where I'm staying, and they gave me a room, both places. Right. And I write what happened that day, what happened the previous night. Then I go to the shows, much like work. And then I try to have an early evening dinner. And usually at Wagamama, which is a couple of doors away from the actual venue for the concert. And Wagamama is a British, Asian-ish chain.
I did wonder what that was. I figured I'd ask you rather than looking it up first.
It's like a noodle place. It's sort of Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese. It's sort of a mixture of everything, but in a sort of British sensibility.
Right, and the band would sometimes eat there too, right? Or other attendees?
The band, the musicians, the Sparks, would eat there. And Ronald Russell always ate, it seems, in their dressing room. Easy food to go from there or some other place. They had a very sort of strict diet where they don't eat, it seems to me they don't eat exotic foods. They're very vegetarian, very almost microbiotic food.
Is that what keeps them looking youthful? I guess as youthful as they look at this. I mean, they look a little bit, you mentioned them being ageless, which I guess is in some sense true, but it's not like they're pop stars that make themselves young in various ways. They don't, in some sense, they never really looked young, but they don't look like mid-60s pop stars.
Well, especially Ron Mail, who always looks older because of the mustache and clothing. He looks like, the older brother or the dad even. Right. So the whole age thing is not an issue really. Right. But they don't drink. They're not in the drug world at all. They're very much a working unit where they sort of focus on the work. They're not into luxury. They're really into like working. They're into like making Sparks music and doing a Sparks show. And they're very, very fun. I mean, as far as I can see, sincerely, this is what they're focused on. They collect stuff. I mean, they collect like toys. They collect, we both love Japan. So they collect, they collect like pachinko machines. But it's very sort of focused collections, and it's all part of the world. It's very somehow Sparks-istic what they do. So again, they didn't. When I did have one meal with them in London, and it was at Wagamama, but a different location.
I see. Another one. Did you get the sense from them that this was anything different than they normally do, or was doing 21 album shows in London just? Of course we would do this for them. You know what I mean? Like this is the next step. This is something we would do. Why is it something that they seem to regard as unusual at all? It seems unusual to us that the band would do that, but I can see to them it would also be natural.
That's part of their charm, to do unnatural things naturally. Yes. If that makes sense. I think they're always thinking that they're competitive in a sense, not against another band, but I think competitive against the world out there where they have to do something unique or something different. And in their minds, this is something totally different. And I'm sure in their minds, no other recording artists have ever done anything like this in such a degree. Like they didn't skip any albums, I mean, if they just did Come On to My House, certain periods, it probably even made more sense. Right. But the fact is they did everything. Well, it is mind-blowing, but it is conceptual. Right. So they do think conceptually. I mean, they think of as, but in a strange way, it's also very logical for them. I mean, it's not like weird. Right. It strikes me kind of weird they would do this. It may strike somebody else kind of weird they would do every album. Right. But to them, it's not weird. It makes perfect sense.
Well, it's the same thing as you writing the book, isn't it? I mean, they monasticize this task by being strict about playing all the albums and rehearsing at such a rigorous schedule, and that almost gives them not just permission for the project, but galvanizes it for them. And you did the same with your routine in London, writing a book about this, attending rigorously every show. There's a sort of monasticization there too. It's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, because I find all the work, I mean, even when I was book buying at Bookshop, I had to work every day. I had to keep the not just the volume of books, but sort of a certain taste, curating the store. And I had to do that every day. And there was not one day where I could not, well, as a book buyer, I could not do it. I had to take care of every day. It could just be an hour a day on my day off, and not a complaint. It was something I really wanted to do, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it otherwise.
Right.
I couldn't do it in a casual sense.
It's all or nothing.
It's all or nothing with me, and I think I got to a point where if you want to do something, you really have to put that focus in to do it. You may not be successful. You may fail, and failure is perfectly okay. Success is great, but in between success and failure strikes me as totally depressing.
It stops being about success and failure at a certain point. It's about you adhering to a task, right? Or you obeying your own orders. That's the form of success you start caring about. It's not what the rest of the world does in response to it. It's just, can I successfully execute these actions, right?
Well, yeah, in a strange way, I could have done like a documentary of the band. I had full access to Ronald Russell as well as the band to interview them wherever I wanted, but I didn't want to do that. And they were okay with it, actually. That wasn't a problem at all. But I think logically, if you're going to do that, you're going to do a documentary of some sort. But what I was doing is documenting my feelings for the shows more and my impressions of the city. I wanted to take it to sort of a higher, in my mind, a literary level. I mean, I really wanted to write a literary book, not only for Sparks fans. Actually, I wasn't even thinking about Sparks fans, to tell you the truth. It's more about me liking a great artist and why I like them and how it affected me. And also I want to actually turn people onto the band as well, like show and tell. And actually, a lot of people who read the book don't know Sparks that well or don't know them at all. And it actually got them to go to Spotify to listen to each album. I know a couple of readers who read one chapter, because each chapter is one show, one album, and they'll read the chapter and then they listen to the album.
Not a bad way to do it.
No, not at all. It's actually a great way of doing it. Sort of reacting or working with the book. It's nice. It works for that reader. Works for obviously works for the band's music and for my book as well.
I mentioned before we recorded, the form of this book it's almost like a francophone book. I mean, it's like some of the modern books in translation I read from French authors. I'm not sure quite what about it, but the fact that there's sort of multiple personal histories going on at once, and the way that you weave culture into it, or that you base it on a separate thread of culture and your interaction with it. You publish books that originate in the French language. Do you think that has any validity, that idea that this is more of a French form than an English language form?
What struck me, I mostly published the works of Boris Vian. And for those out there who don't know Boris Vian's work, Boris Vian was the focus point personality of post-war Paris from like 46 to like 59 when he died quite young. And Vian had his fingers and toes and nose and tongue in every interesting aspect of French culture at that time. And he brought American jazz musicians to France, to Paris. He was a record A&R person, as well as a novelist. He was a translator of hard-boiled American crime novels into French, and he knew everybody from Juliet Greco to Miles Davis to Charlie Parker to Jean-Paul Sartre to Cocteau and onward. And he was the guy you go to if you want to meet somebody. And Vian also was in the nightclubs a lot. And he was, and one of the many things he did, he was also wrote jazz column or jazz criticism, because of course he was a huge jazz fan. And while I was writing the book, I was thinking about him a lot, because he always, not like I'm an expert, I'm a professor. There's two type of jazz music at the time. They were against each other. One was New Orleans jazz, trad jazz, and then bebop. And Vian, weird enough, played the trumpet, played traditional jazz, but loved and supported with his writings bebop jazz. And it was like a war. It was like sort of like mods versus rockers type of thing. So when Vian wrote about jazz artists' recordings, it was very like sort of punk rock, actually, when you read it. It's very like just full of passion. I'm not even sure if it's even accurate, his opinions, or like he got the facts right. It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that he loves this record, how the record affects him. Right. And he's Boris Vian. Right. And I want to write that book the same way. Like, I love Sparks. I don't know if all the facts are factual, but I'm Tosh. And I want to put I want it to be a performer in the book of sorts. And always the writer or the reader has to be aware that it's my story, or it's a narrative sort. And you may not like that narrative, or maybe gets in the way of the narrative, or that reader's appreciation of Sparks. But nevertheless, it is my take on the culture of Sparks as well as Sparks music. And because of Boris Vian being, a French writer.
There's a sense that when you're writing about an album, let's say you're writing about Kimono My House, you could write, I love Kimono My House. You could write Kimono My House is a great album, but that sentences like those don't necessarily mean anything to a reader who doesn't know you. You have to write, as you said, about its effect on you, and those don't necessarily best include the words love or great, right?
Yeah, it's not. For me, my love of a culture, of album, I write actually a lot about music lately. I'm doing I'm actually working on an idea of writing a music book. But, a lot of times I'll write music reviews. It's nothing about the melody or the words. I'm writing about a feeling I get from the record. And same, when I write little book reviews or commentary on books, very rarely I even remember the narration. Location's important to me. The character's important to me. And that's basically it. I like noir books because not of the plotting necessarily, but it's about a city and it's about a character or various characters and how they interact with their location. When I go to a bookstore, my ideal bookstore, and I didn't do this at Book Soup, but I would love to go to a London section where I just get literature based in London or Paris or anywhere in the world. That's how I would separate the fiction section. But not author, but location.
Yeah, no, I would certainly browse those shelves myself. I'd like to see that. But talking about cities, you mentioned in the book that Paris pop culture has it has a curiosity to it, a driving curiosity. It pulls from other sources and adapts them for itself. You found, I believe, in London that its pop culture is a bit more hardened, a bit more closed off. If you can correct me if I have that not quite right, but whether I do or don't, I mean, how does Los Angeles compare? Seeing as Sparks emerged from Los Angeles, and that's always put as a surprise. Like, can you believe they came out of the greater Los Angeles area? But also, I think it's somehow not a surprise as well. Their own adaptability and their making themselves outsiders wherever they happen to be. That seems to be a Los Angeles quality as well. I don't know if you agree or not.
I do. Los Angeles, like London's a great city, even though I have troubles with aspects of London life and the city itself. Paris, Tokyo is another city I love, Paris. And Los Angeles, incredible city. And it's an incredible city because of what it is. I mean, it's a surface city, which I like, like in my bands, because various people come here to work in the entertainment industry. They come here to pretend to be somebody else or to make stories that's not necessarily their stories, but it's pretend. It's pretend town. As well as being an incredible multicultural location of various restaurants, foods, people. I mean, taking a bus, 'cause I'm a bus rider. If you just take the bus from downtown to Santa Monica, I probably run across, 4 or 5 different languages.
Right, definitely.
And it's fascinating. I mean, it's an incredible city. I mean, Los Angeles is truly, truly incredible city. I mean, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, but I never ever felt, it's funny, when I'm away from Los Angeles, I don't miss it at all. But my appreciation of Los Angeles is really, really great. I think I love stories that take place in Los Angeles. I love the people of Los Angeles. And Los Angeles itself is an incredible character. I mean, beautiful character.
And it's not a place you think is going to, it's not going to go away when you're gone. You think maybe, the London I know might change into unrecognizability. The Paris I love might go away. You never think Los Angeles is going anywhere, right?
Well, that's another beauty aspect of it. The cities I like Tokyo and Los Angeles, could be totally wiped out in an earthquake, gone. So that
indeed, sometimes it seems likely.
It does seem likely to me. It does. So that is a real feeling I have that it will not last forever here, and it doesn't terrify me, but it makes me think about. I really appreciate the moments I am here. Same as in Tokyo. I just feel that you walk around downtown, and it's just downtown itself is this absolutely fascinating part of Los Angeles, and I do hope they get the metro system really first class, and I think they're heading that direction.
It's getting there.
I would love to just to walk downtown and just take a train to like Santa Monica.
Right.
Just not even think about it, not even plan for it. And because like in Tokyo, you don't really have to plan. There's so much transportation everywhere, like subways, trains, all excellent. And Paris is that way too, like central Paris. London is a little bit more tricky because there's central London. If you're outside of that, in that central London area, it's kind of hard to get to places. But the beauty of Los Angeles, for me, is realizing that it will not be here forever. I don't think it will be. I mean, I think it'll be, I hate to, I know not to be a doomslayer, but there will be a disaster of some sort. And, and I live here, and that's, in many ways, that's perfectly okay.
It's probably not disappearing when you're away on a trip, but in the long run, it's not going to be here.
Well, strange. When I was I lived in Japan, and it was Japan in 89, 90, which was no internet. And I was in a very small town in Japan. And so any English news I get was like 2 or 3 days later. And at the time in 89, many things happened. The Berlin Wall went down. And also there was a huge earthquake in San Francisco. And a serious earthquake in San Francisco at that time. And I didn't know, some Japanese people told me about it, and they didn't speak English that well or at all. But I gathered something bad happened in San Francisco. And I went, San Francisco gone? And they went, yes. And that's and for 2 days I thought there was no San Francisco anymore. So it was in my head, And so the moment that so you sort of appreciate the moments you're here, and the Spark shows it was never going to be repeated. And the fact the last show was the most sort of emotional and most poignant for me because the very last show, the band projected the album covers on a big screen. So basically it was like the first album. Ron Mail got away from his keyboard. He had a lighter, like a little Vic lighter. He looked like he was lighting the screen, and the album cover like flame up. Then the next album showed up. He burns that. So in a sense, it's either them destroying their work, all the work they've done, or limiting that work so they can do something new, or doing some type of house cleaning. But the fact that it was just really, really emotionally incredible to see an artist, at least to me, make a comment about their work and about sort of burning the work afterwards.
It's a stark contrast to so many bands of their age who are overburdened by their history. Los Angeles is also not that burdened by its history, isn't it?
No. And this may be part of the Los Angeles aspect of Sparks, where we don't feel that secure and that safe, or we accept that insecurity. That's a better word. We accept the insecurity, or that sort of nervous tension.
As do Sparks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm always conscious, because I've been through one really huge bad earthquake here, that to make sure my glasses or my pants are around.
Yes, indeed. In reaching distance.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of that.
Right.
And in fact, and also my father was killed in a car accident. So to this day, if people are driving, I always tell people to drive safely, or just like, if my wife goes out, I tell her, drive carefully. And it really just takes me back to that moment when I lost my father in a car accident.
Right. We talk about monasticization, but awareness of impermanence. That's a part of that whole life, is it not?
Yes. Yeah. So it's sort of like you can't avoid that loss, or it's just you live with it. And I felt that way about Los Angeles, and I felt this way about seeing the Spark shows. It will never happen again. I was there for the moment, and it was a very special moment. It was very like. I just felt so fortunate being there, but also to experience an artist giving so much to their catalog and to their work, and then the last show they actually burned symbolically. They burned all their albums. This made a huge impression. I mean, especially as my thoughts of sort of fatalism and being a city that will not be around anymore. It all fit into my point of view.
I've been speaking with Tosh Berman. He was the longtime book buyer at Book Soup on the Sunset Strip. He is the founder of TamTam Books and the author of Sparks-Tastic, 21 Nights with Sparks in London. Tosh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall. You can find much more at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.